Hey, Evan, how's it going today? Thanks for joining.
Very good. Thanks for having me.
All right, so just wanted to quickly read back a little bit of your background before we jump in. It looks like back in 2011, you co-founded Rework, which was a recruiting company that helped professionals find some meaningful work. Around 2016, you transitioned to the board, where in 2017 it was sold to Koya Partners. Then in 2016, you ended up co-founding Getro, and then in 2017, a Techstars accelerator helped get things going. And now we're here in 2025. I know there's a lot more, but is there anything specific to like around Getro you wanted to add?
Speed running in the background. Yeah, I mean, we've just had some really interesting kind of ups and downs and lefts and rights at Getro over the years. But yeah, we could get into that as we start talking about it.
Cool. That's a perfect segue. For anybody who doesn't know already, what is Getro? What do you guys do and who you're for?
Yeah, so we've built a platform that helps people understand who exists in their warm network and then leveraging that network for warm introductions for lots of different use cases. A lot of our customers are venture capital funds and PE funds, and they use the product to basically make more warm introductions for their portfolio companies. So if they want to help the portfolio company with finding a sales lead or hiring a key employee or raising the next round, they'll use Getro to map their network and figure out who they can introduce. We also work with B2B SaaS companies who are looking to grow their community and support their customers with introductions, mainly around talent.
Awesome. Yeah, that's obviously very important. So, what sort of sparked your interest in wanting to start something like that? What the driving factors saying like, "Hey, this needs to exist"?
Yeah, we were running a recruiting agency and we had been working with lots of communities where we noticed that a lot of the people we were placing into jobs were coming from these partnerships with communities. But the communities themselves were using like Facebook groups or text. They just didn't have any tools to make connections. And so we started getting interested in like, what if we could use software to kind of get out of the way and just let more companies and more people connect. And I was getting more and more passionate about using software. I was kind of early in my entrepreneurial journey. The recruiting agency was a service business. Like I was curious about scaling a technology company. And so all those things kind of fit together. And myself and my current co-founder were both at Rework. We ended up leaving Rework and kind of handed the business off to one of our other co-founders, and we started Getro.
I'm sure there's a lot of things you're paying attention to, obviously from a, like an industry trend perspective. Is there anything specific that's like top of mind that you're finding most interesting right now, or how have things changed since you started things back in 2016?
I mean, it's hard not to answer that question with something related to AI. I think it's like on everybody's mind. It's certainly sped up our ability to just do things across the board of the entire company. So with engineering, with go to market, with operations, everything feels faster and to me just more fun. Like my ability to get work done, I'm able to find answers to questions much faster. I'm using tools like Whisperflow to just dictate into my computer to write things. And it's just such a different time. And I think another thing that comes to mind is remote work has changed a lot. So when we first started the business, we were remote and a lot of our peer companies were in person. So this is like, a couple of years before COVID. And it was interesting because we were able to find people working in other countries who were really excited to work with us that never would have had similar opportunities because there was just way less happening with remote work. And so we kind of got the benefit of that. But one of the challenges is that the tools were awful. Like you couldn't have a clear call. Zoom was way worse. A lot of the collaboration platforms weren't really out there yet. Looking back to like 2017, 2018, we were getting started. So now the collaboration tools for remote work have gotten so much better. And so it's just much easier for us to get work done in general. I feel like we're with a team that isn't much bigger. We have 20 people full time today. I think we can just get so much more done with less.
That's a very lean team with everything you guys have accomplished. So, if you think back to sort of the early days in your go to market motion, obviously you mentioned venture capital is one of the large customer bases. I see that there's other opportunities too within recruiting and Web3 and just different areas. How did you approach getting your first couple of customers?
Yeah, when we first started, our idea was to be more of a talent marketplace. And we went through Techstars and we were just exploring lots of ideas. And as we were fundraising, we were talking to investors about raising money and investing in our company. But at the same time, they were curious about the prototype that we had built, which was basically doing job scraping and trying to find really interesting opportunities for job seekers kind of in an automatic way. And we realized that we could actually build a version of the product for the investor where they could we could essentially scrape all the open jobs from their portfolio companies, put it on their website, and give them kind of an automated white label job board. And they were like, I want that. How much does that cost? And we were kind of surprised by that because we thought of the opportunity to sell the product to VCs, but it just wasn't where our mind was at the time. And it was a couple months after Techstars. We were fundraising. We were having a hard time raising money. More and more investors were talking to us about buying the product. And we're like, okay, maybe we should just sell the product. And so we ended up bootstrapping the company like that. And what I remember was we were going through Techstars, they really harped on the value of the network. And we had connected with lots of mentors and investors and other founders during the program. And so we basically just went to Canada. Like we were, my co-founder's from Spain. He didn't have a US visa. So we kind of had to leave the US when the program ended. And we wanted to keep working together. So we got an Airbnb. We kind of holed up in a small town outside of Vancouver called Squamish, and just decided to reach out to as many VCs as we could possibly get to through our warm connections that we had made through Techstars. And so we had this flow where we basically built an Excel spreadsheet. We went and connected with as many people as we could find that we had met through Techstars on LinkedIn. We mapped all the investors at that time, all the partners and team members. And then we tried to get the network overlap of who we were connected to on LinkedIn, who they were connected to at each of these funds, and then who we had that warm connection through, and had a partner called Task Minions. It was kind of like a virtual assistant team support us in just doing like a bunch of warm outbound email campaigns. And that's how we got our first probably 30 customers, which made us feel confident enough to basically stop fundraising and just kind of go to market with that product.
Where was any challenges that came up? And it sounds like you got your first 30 customers and things went like, what were some of the harder things you remember back in the early days when you were trying to get those first few customers?
I think one is just like when you are just getting started, you're pitching the vision of what you want the product to be. And then there's the reality of just what's possible to build in a certain amount of time. And I think that that's changed a little bit now. I mean, a little bit, because it's just much easier and cheaper to build software today than it was at that time. But at least at that time, your vision and what you want the product to be is always going to be probably like bigger than what it is. And so the challenge is like being able to sell that to someone and ride the line between not over promising to the point where they're just like trying it and immediately churning and ruining your reputation, but also not hedging so much that you're not getting them excited. And I think it's always a line that you walk in sales, but especially when you're getting started. And actually, maybe because I am non-technical and was not really in the weeds of the product, it probably benefited me that I was doing the sales, because I wasn't really even understanding some of the bugs or some of the challenges. And I think in a way, my co-founder did a pretty good job kind of sheltering me from that, which also created frustration, but ultimately it was probably a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a really interesting point. I think that everyone who's worked in a software company sees, which is some of the best sort of product ideas too sometimes come from customer suggestions or recommendations.
Yeah.
Right? So if you think back to like the original version of the product and how it's evolved now, how much of that has changed from feedback from customers? Is it completely different than you could have imagined back when you first started?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we've always tried to be very customer driven and spent a lot of time with customers understanding their needs. We went through a whole period where we had a really big customer come to us. They wanted to give us more money to develop the roadmap to be a little bit more of a fit for what their dynamics were and what they needed. It was a great brand. We were really excited to partner with them, and we kind of took that on. And we ended up going really deep, building out a version of the product that they thought was a fit for them and we thought was going to be a fit for a bigger market. And I think some of those hypotheses didn't really work out. And what I think I was a little too naive to really understand is that when a customer is telling you what they want, they have like only their context in mind. And a lot of times they're making assumptions about what the solution should be. So when you're doing customer discovery, you want to really dial in on the problem and understand the problem as deeply as possible. But sometimes taking the solution recommendations with a bit of a grain of salt and trying to get a broad base of context from multiple customers to make sure that you're actually building something for a market and bringing the wisdom that you have of immersing yourself fully in this problem set, where for the customer, usually it's just one part of their day. And, they maybe saw something online, they have confirmation bias, their friend told them a thing, like, they're not necessarily product people, and they're certainly not thinking about how you can build your business. Like they're really just wanting to solve their own pain. So yeah, we definitely went down some rabbit holes that we had to kind of revert back from and even like rebuild things from scratch in some cases because of some of those assumptions that were made. And I think everybody goes through that. It's pretty hard to avoid. And in a way, it's like instead of trying to avoid it and being over cautious, like trying to rapid prototype as fast as possible to get confirmation and positive feedback without making too big of a bet in one direction, I think is really important when you're super early.
I think a lot of times customers can always find something that they want to add to the product, right? So
Yeah,
it can
right.
be, it's like you don't
Yeah.
want to gauge your product roadmap off of everything that's brought up on it because things can always be better. There's always something that can be added and everyone has their own opinion. So yeah, balancing that sounds like a really difficult thing, especially when you're scaling and growing. And those first few customers are very, very important.
Yeah. And another thing that comes up when you ask that is that when you're early, you're trying to figure out who your customer is. Like you're trying to figure out how do I find product market fit? And product market fit, I think it goes beyond just being able to sell something to a customer and having them buy it. If you're trying to build a big company and if you're trying to raise money to fund that company, then you're kind of fitting in this bucket inherently. But the market part of product market fit is like there has to be a big enough market that you can reasonably scale a business. There's different schools of thought. I think some people feel like starting off extremely niche is totally fine, nailing it for 100 customers or 10 customers and then expanding once you understand the landscape better is a totally legitimate strategy. But I think keeping an eye on that's very important because for us, we ended up selling a product to a market that was relatively small. We found adjacent markets that we could kind of bring in. But as soon as you do that, each customer type is slightly different. And it might kind of, when you squint, it looks similar at first, but as you go deeper into their pain, you start to get pulled in different nuanced directions. And our product, like we work with a lot of economic development organizations, we work with professional membership organizations, we work with some recruiters, and each of those market segments, if they had their way, they'd have like 15 features that they want us to build. But for us, like we really landed on venture capital and private equity. And at first, we really kind of resisted focusing there because we didn't want to kind of almost like keep the opportunity small. We wanted to have as many customers as possible. And over the years, what we learned is that the deeper you go with one segment, it's very hard to build something that people love for multiple segments at a time as a small company. So in retrospect, it probably would have been better for us just to say, you know what, we're only going to focus on this segment now that we have traction here. Those other customers, like maybe they can use the product, but from a roadmap standpoint, we're very focused in one lane. And then over time, when you get big enough, you have the bandwidth and the resources to go take on intentionally new segments. And so I think in a way, it's taken us longer to get to where we are today, and we are serving multiple segments well. But I'm always curious about what would have happened to the business if we had just gone like all in on one and then focus there first.
I guess that brings me to want to ask when you're thinking about some of the growth that you've had, where one of the bigger channels was unlocked in terms of, was it expanding out of VC, PE, or was it a specific hire you made or a new product launch? If you think back, is there something that stands out to you in terms of what unlocked a good bit of growth?
Yeah, I think maybe like two things come to mind. One is that our first product was the job board product. So we scrape jobs from career pages of companies. We build a white label job board solution, and we've expanded the feature set beyond that over the years. But that product itself has a powered by Getro on the actual product. And so the customer puts this on their website and potential prospects can see it. In our case, the people who are using that page tend to be job seekers. So every kind of traffic hit is not a relevant lead for us. But at least in the VC world, a lot of funds know each other and they talk. And so if you're thinking about building a job board for your venture fund, you're going to go to the website of the top 10 venture funds that you know and see what they use. And you see the page, you see that Getro's there, and you're like, okay, let's check out what Getro does. So I think that strategy of kind of forcing that to be on the board. And early on, we had customers ask if they could pay to remove it. And we always just said no. And I think that it didn't end up really mattering to people at the end of the day. Like we've never had anyone churn for that reason. And we keep it small and modest. Like, it's not like blah, like on the page. So you have to be thoughtful about it. But that was a really good strategy to find inbound leads. The second thing is hiring our first salesperson. So we brought on a guy named Ted, who's was a friend of mine. He's an entrepreneur, very scrappy. He didn't have a background in B2B SaaS sales. He had a background in starting companies. And I think as a first hire in sales, taking over from founder-led sales into starting to expand the team, we were still at a place where we were trying to figure out who we were and how we sold the offering. And I think if we had hired someone who had just been an AE or just been an SDR and they were trying to go to the next step, they probably would have gotten so frustrated with us not knowing what we were doing and like left the company. And we did actually down the road face some churn, like trying to grow the sales team and probably not finding folks who had enough of an appetite for that early stage. But bringing Ted on, I think because he had that background in entrepreneurship, he was excited to try to figure it out along the way and was flexible as we were experimenting with things. And I think that was a great move.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think to work at a startup, it takes a specific kind of person too, where if you
Mhm.
come from a very large company that has a very specific playbook that they run, if you do these things, you'll get this result. It's like you go to a startup, it's like, where's my computer? It's like, oh, we got to
Right.
buy it still, right? When you think about your experience, what have been some bigger things that you think now are misconceptions or just not true?
I mean, one that just feels a little bit brutal that I think is a huge misconception is that you can't start a technology company without raising venture capital. And that's changing actually now, but I think when we first started Getro, like there was still this feeling that you really like if you didn't raise money from VCs, then like you weren't really like a real startup or something. And I think that, as mentioned before, like it's easier to get off the ground and validate your idea now. And so it's easier to get started, it's easier to get customers. But I think after having spent a lot of time both raising money and also just spending time with friends who have raised money, it's more clear to me that venture capital financing specifically is a very specific type of tool in a specific moment of a specific type of company. And there are other kinds of funding mechanisms. Like we have raised venture capital. We've also done revenue-based financing in the past a couple times in the organization to kind of smooth over cash flow. We've kind of gotten to profitability at different times. And then we've decided to invest more money back into the company and not be profitable again. And I got back to profitability. So there's a lot of different kind of ways to use creative financing. And I think that it's still very opaque to founders. Another thing that comes to mind is that there's a lot of out there about what exits actually look like for founders. When I first started my company, I thought that any time a company got sold, it was like a huge win and everybody's like really excited about it and everybody gets rich. And that's also not the case. As you learn more about financing rounds and different kinds of mechanism and terms and term sheets, you realize that it's possible to sell a company for $50 million, $100 million, $200 million, and for the founders to actually not make any money because of how the rounds went and how they were diluted over time. There's been cases where I've had friends sell companies for $10 million, $15 million who've had more of an exit than founders who have sold companies for $100 million because of the way that that played out. And that's not really something that anyone talks about publicly because like what incentive do you have to do that? But it just puts into perspective that if you're trying to get rich, it certainly is a way to make money. But I think the motivation needs to be, maybe not needs to be, but it's helpful if it's deeper than that. And there's some level of even obsession with the problem you're solving or, the cohort of people that you're trying to solve a problem for.
I think that even trickles down to people who want to work at a startup because they might have this idea that they're going to get a larger equity package than they get at a big company. And if something exits, then they're going to be set. And like you said, if the founder's not set, then I'd assume that the employee's not going to be set too.
Yeah.
So wanting to be a part of that mission is definitely very important, I think, as well. It sounds like your entire history in building companies has been very people oriented around recruiting, helping people find a good job, to Getro,
Yeah.
helping make the right introductions and get people connected. In closing, what's something that you're most proud of with everything that you've built so far?
I'd say I'm really proud of the resilience that the team that our team has had over the last few years. It's been a pretty crazy last couple of years to run a software business. 2019 felt like everybody was doing great, and then 2020 happened, and COVID just kind of like decimated everybody's mental health, and the dynamics of the market completely changed. 2021 felt like a big upswing. 2022, 2023 have been really challenging, and AI has also been very disruptive. So I think things are just changing at such a fast pace, and you need to be resilient to that pace and try to take a bigger picture perspective. I've been proud and impressed by just some of the flexibility that I've seen from our team to kind of like waver those waves and still build a very resilient business.
Amazing. Well, if people want to learn more about Getro or connect with you, where should they go? Where should they find you?
Yeah, website's getro.com. It's Evan Walden is my Twitter handle, X handle, and Instagram. Or just shoot me an email, evan@getro.com. Happy to connect.
Sounds good. And for anybody out there too, I'm connected with Evan on LinkedIn. I always see him in the Getro page post openings too around different roles. So if you are interested in seeing some stuff out there, they have some good content around that too. All righty.
Nice.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Mateo.
All opinions expressed by Mateo and his guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of their employer, employees, or affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions.